Can everyone hear me all right? Yeah. I'm slightly too short for this stand, so. Okay, yeah, so just asking about gender is my talk. A little bit about me, obviously, I'm Chad. I used to be a Rails developer, then I was a producer, which is kind of like a service designer, stroke project manager, stroke dog's body. So I'm based in Sheffield, but I'm looking for work at the minute. I'm Citation on Twitter and GitHub and pretty much everywhere else that exists. And if you tweet about me or you're going to blog about this or whatever, I use she, her as my pronouns. Okay, cool. So we've all heard of this idea of the gender binary, right? What the gender binary is essentially the kind of Western, when I talk about this, it's kind of very UK, US, kind of Western Europe kind of. It's based on this idea that everybody has a gender and that there are two genders. There's male here and there's female here. And they're different and they're distinct and they don't overlap and everyone is born with a gender and they have that gender and they die with that gender, essentially. So given that this idea is true, this is how you ask about gender. Thank you very much. It's good to see you. But actually, we know that things are way more complicated than that. People are much more complicated than that. So I keep coming up with really kind of weird, tortured analogies to explain gender to people. This is my latest and greatest. This is the gender spectrum analyzer. Ooh. What this space is trying to get over is that actually gender is made up of lots of different facets and things. Some of them are physical, some of them are mental, some of them are social. So as you can see, we've kind of got 5 pillars, I guess. And for each of these pillars, each of these is not binary either. Okay, so if we take chromosomes, for example, we all know that girls have XX chromosomes and boys have XY chromosomes, right? But that's not true. There are lots of genetic variations. There's things like Klinefelter, which is XXY, and that's 1 in 1,000 male births. But, you know, genetics is hard, we can't see genetics. But what about sexual characteristics? Because men have penises, right? And women don't. But this, again, isn't true either. So we have this concept of intersex. And these are babies who are born. Basically, your gender is decided by a doctor who looks at you when you're a baby and goes, you're in that box. And we can't do that for everybody because biology is different. So you're kind of looking at between 1 in 1,500 and 1 in 2,000 births in the UK are people who we cannot stick in this box very well. Expressions, so this is kind of how you choose to express yourself. You know, we have this idea that dresses are feminine and like facial hair is masculine and all this kind of stuff. But like, I look around the room now and I know there are a lot of women in the audience, not men in the audience, and you're not all wearing dresses and high heels and makeup though, because actually, you know, again, like this is a spectrum. Gender role, so tech is masculine, you know, and the nurturing things are feminine, etc. But none of these really matter when it comes to identity. So identity is the last column. And what your gender identity is also really hard to explain, even though it's most important. But your gender identity is, well, it's who you are. And it's how you conceptualize your gender to yourself. And this is made up of these other things, okay? So if you're assigned female at birth and you're raised female, you know, you are likely to identify perhaps as female when you get older because you're kind of raised in this environment. But this isn't true for everybody. So this is when we're kind of talking about transgender, and this is sort of where we're talking about non-binary as ideas. But the most important thing for you to remember, I guess, from this slide is like, if you're ever bored one day, this is a really cool thought experiment to just fill out for yourself. This is mine, by the way. But, what was I saying? But actually, like, identity is the most important. And while it is based on all of these things, it also trumps all of those things. It doesn't matter what I look like. It doesn't matter how my body is made up. It doesn't matter what my genetics are. My gender identity is my gender. And that is the gender that should be respected by society and then by us as web developers. So kind of quickly go over this. These terms I'm kind of simplifying them slightly for the purposes of the talk. There's a lot of overlap, but when I talk about transgender people, I'm talking about someone who is transitioning between probably the binary gender. So these are people who are assigned female at birth, but then transition to male in later life or vice versa. When I talk about intersex, we're talking about people who are born with an anatomy, a physicality that doesn't fit into what we define as being male or female bodies. And when we talk about non-binary, what we talk about are people who do not identify as being male or female. So these are people who perhaps don't have a gender at all, identify as being agender, We are talking about people like myself. I'm bi-gender, which means I identify as male and female. People who are gender fluid, whose gender identity changes over time. So for people like me and people like other non-binary people, the form I showed you earlier, I can't fill that field in without lying to you. And you obviously, when you're asking users for data, you want them to tell you, they want you to tell you their actual information, right? Otherwise you wouldn't ask for it in the first place. Okay, cool, gender is complicated, that's great. Like how do I ask about gender? I want to see. Well, actually we really need to think about why you're asking about gender in the first place. And when is it okay to ask about gender, and perhaps when is it not? It is okay to ask about gender if you're monitoring diversity. So, say you are, say for something like a tech conference, right? So for example, women are underrepresented in tech, so you're doing initiatives to get more women and kind of ethnic minorities and stuff into tech, and you only know those things are working if you're asking people about those demographics. So I think in those circumstances, or certain circumstances, if you're running a community, I think that's kind of okay. There's the obvious caveat that everything should always be optional. This is supposed to be for when it's sort of okay. I just like emoji, so that's what we got. So social profiles, right? So you kind of go, well, okay, yeah, but like Facebook, okay, so Facebook. Facebook, you want to ask me my gender because you're going to spit that back out, right? So you're going to say to me, what's your gender? I'm going to tell you, and then when someone comes to my Facebook page, they can go, oh, it's Chad, and they really like, kittens, and oh yeah, they're this gender. And that's fine, and obviously there are kind of things like dating sites and stuff where kind of gender is kind of quite important to that kind of social interaction that you have going on. The caveat here is about privacy. So the cardinal rule, and like the one rule you should always stick to, is to never out anybody. So because people who are transgender, intersex, non-binary have a gender that is non-typical, a gender that is different, that's a vulnerability. And we've seen this right with women in tech, right? That having a non-typical gender for the part of society that you're in is a vulnerability. It's something that can and is used against you. And so it's up to us as responsible developers to make sure that data is not shared or visible to anyone who could cause that person harm because of that thing. So for example, when Google switched their SMS to Hangouts a few versions of Android ago, lots of people, I've got multiple Google accounts, and what happens is a lot of trans people who perhaps have one Google account where they're out to their friends, but then another account they have for work and they're out at work, were accidentally texting like bosses and stuff from their like personal accounts and outing themselves to their employers, which is bad. So you should always allow people to set the privacy to kind of say, we're going to ask you about your gender. So Facebook does do this, and I can say, actually, I only want my friends to see what my gender is. I don't want my parents to see it, for example. I've given this talk a few times, and a lot of devs will say to me, like, actually, we need to ask about gender, not because we actually really care about it, but because we're hooking into like a financial or a legal or a governmental service who ask for it. This is fine because you can't, it's annoying, but you can't really avoid it as a developer. But again, you need to kind of put that caveat in. You need to be really open to people and say, look, we're asking you about your gender because actually we want your gender from your passport. And that's a separate question. Asking someone what their legal gender is or the gender on their driving license is a separate question to asking what their gender is. So as long as you tell people what that is, they know what they need to put. Or if you say, oh, I'm hooking it up to this payroll software, you kind of go, okay, but I'm not out at work, so I need to put this gender in for this. When is it not okay? With the angry face. So gendered advertising, we all know this is rubbish. Like advertisers have told me this is rubbish. Gendered advertising is just full of false positives. It's degrading, right? You have this thing that like, so women have moisturizers, but men have like face refueling. There's all these things. I did have a really good slide. I don't have a good enough photograph for it, but like there's like a male version of Q-tips, little cotton wool buds, and it's about like the description of it is about like the multi-tool for your face. But this is demeaning to men, right? Because you can put moisturizer on without suddenly kind of having like an identity crisis. But again, with stuff, like Twitter doesn't ask you your gender, but Twitter will assume my gender based on my name or who I talk to or what I tweet about. And Google do this as well. They kind of, they used to kind of do like, oh hey, like your Google searches are about like video games or software engineering, so you're probably a dude. And you can kind of see like where this is all like horribly breaking down. Refusing services or changing services. So in the UK anyway, we have the Equality Act, and the Equality Act protects against gender, so basically against gender. So you can't discriminate, apart from mixed sections, you can't discriminate against somebody because of their gender. It also covers gender reassignments. This is trans people. You cannot refuse a service to somebody if they're trans or if you think they're trans. So you have to be really careful that when you're asking about gender, that it's not changing the service you're providing to that person based on that information. Or if it is, you need to be really, really careful you're not accidentally kind of breaching equality laws. Assuming physical attributes. So say I want to write an app where, say I want an app where I'm tracking, you know, like this, like a period tracking app, let's go with that. And you kind of go, okay, cool, so I'm writing this cool app tracks periods. So all my users are going to be women, right? Well, they're not. So non-binary people still have periods and still can have children, still get pregnant. A lot of trans men, so these are people who are assigned female at birth and transition to male, they are men, but they may still keep their kind of womb and uterus, and they do have children. So you can't, no matter how gendered you think a physical attribute is, there are always going to be people of the other gender or other genders with that physical attribute. And then there's also tradition, because I think on the whole, developers can be incredibly lazy. And if you're knocking up an app really quick, you kind of go, great, I need a users table, so it's first name, last name, gender, date of birth, address. And it can be really easy to just kind of ask users for data without really thinking about what you're going to use that data for. And that doesn't just apply to gender, it applies to a lot of things. Date of birth is another niggle I have. I hate how everyone asks for date of birth, when actually what they really want to ask me is if I'm over 18 or not. Which is why, like, everyone on the internet's birthday is the 1st of January 1970. It's definitely my Steam birthday. A really quick note on titles, actually, just because this is an incredibly personal bugbear of mine. So titles, this is by titles I mean, you know, like Miss, Mrs, Sir, all that kind of stuff. Social titles, so social titles are the Mr, Mrs, Miss, that kind of stuff. They're not a legally required part of a name. It is perfectly legitimate for someone to tell you they do not have a title. How many people write forms where you have to put a title in? You don't have to put your hands up, but it's a lot. But it's not a legal thing. There are titles that protect us, things like Sir, Lady, you know, military titles, Doctor, etc. They're protected, but again, people don't have to use those. And then don't use titles to assume gender. So people sit there and think, aha, I can't ask about gender, but I can ask if you're a Mr. or a Mrs. I am so clever, I have fooled the system. Compare the market when you sign up for car insurance. When it has the title drop down, it has two separate options for male doctor and female doctor, because they want to ask you your gender and can't, and using your title to assume. So everyone put doctor in so that no one would say that they would have to avoid that question, and so they split that out. Don't do that. If you do have to ask about titles, make it a text field, because text fields are great. If not, there's this title called Mix. It's spelled MX, pronounced Mix. It's accepted by literally everybody these days. So like, it's on my bank card, it's on my driving license, it's from letters I get from the passport office and stuff. It's the gender neutral title, essentially. Please have this as an option. If you don't, I will pick the stupidest title on your website. I am an admiral, I am a captain. But it's frustrating, right? That you kind of go, oh, I want to put my title in, I have a legitimate title, but I can't put it in your website. Especially if you have that massive list where it's like, I can be, you know, like assistant commander. But I can't be mixed. So please stop, just stop. Okay, right, Chad, I get it, right? Gender is complicated, I'm totally on board with that. And oh, you know, asking about gender, maybe I shouldn't be doing it, but I have to do it because you're clients. Or maybe I am monitoring diversity, and this is a great talk for me. So how do I ask about gender? Let's start with how you don't ask about gender, because that's always much more fun. So this is from Vimeo. My issue with this is not the binary choice, even though it is, but it's not the issue I'm talking about. You can't read it. Basically, the help text for gender field is, let us know so we can call you by the appropriate pronoun. What you're doing here, or what they're doing rather, is that they are assuming something about me based on my gender. So what you need to do in a situation like this is you need to ask the actual question. So say for the period app, what you might want to ask is, do you have periods? Not, are you a woman, and then assume that thing. Or, oh, okay, you put female, so you must go by she, etc., etc. So basically, yeah, like, you know, assume makes an ass out of you and me. That's basically the idea. This is not my current favourite, but it's a very recent favourite. And this is from a yoga app on the App Store. Their gender field is nonsensical at best. So it's like the Mars-Venus symbol, even though the Venus symbol's slightly tilted, so I don't really think that's even So basically, they've done it so wrong that they've made the wrong thing also wrong. But this kind of highlights actually our ideas about gender are very westernized, and that now we're kind of writing apps for international. Lots of different cultures view gender in different ways. Also, like, I cannot even tell you how much I hate this. Don't do that. Talking of options, so this is from the organ donation form, I think, or the blood form. It's an NHS form of some description, actually. And you may think, oh, okay, cool, like, we want to be really inclusive, and we know that trans people are a thing and they exist. So what we're going to do is we're going to have an option on here for transgender, right? Because that's really inclusive. I gave this talk at PyCon UK last year, and there were a lot of trans people in the room, and I put up this slide, or a slide with a very similar form, and they audibly groaned, like, as a whole, because they hate this. Everybody hates this. The reason people hate it is because, first of all, transgender is not a gender in and of itself. It's an attribute about somebody, and some trans people do consider it their gender identity, and that's fine. But a lot of transgender people will just put male or female, if that's what I identify as. Non-binary people like myself can't answer this form either, because I'm not transgender, and I'm not male, I'm not female. I do know my gender, and I could give you my gender. I'm not sure why given's a capital letter, actually. This has also annoyed me, which is quite annoying. But yeah, so when you kind of think, okay, we're going to have transgender as an option, that just doesn't work for anybody. Cool. So what do you put? So from a user's perspective, I really like text fields. If you just say, what's your gender, give me a text field, that's fantastic, because I can write whatever I want. As a developer, I know that is a massive pain to try and parse data of a text field. Because even if you think about, even if you're male and you want to put that you're male in a text field, how many different ways can we think of doing that? You could write male, you could write boy, you could write M, you could write guy, you could write dude, you could write, you know, the cool one. There's a really good list on Metafilter, because they had a text field for gender, and they released kind of all the different things that people have put. And there are some of them that are essays, like people have literally written paragraphs about their gender identity, which is amazing. But as a developer, you can't get a paragraph out and go, I think it's a guy, you know, like, as a developer, it's really hard. So obviously the easiest way to do it is, if we're going to have that drop down or the kind of radio button or etc., just bang some more options on the end that are really inclusive. Excellent. But then what do we call that option? Because language is hard. So you'll see this a lot actually in forms where people have like male, female, other. That's othering, and I know that sounds really obvious once I've said it out loud, but it only sounds obvious when you say it out loud. I'm not an other. It's slightly dehumanizing. As we said, transgender is also bad because it doesn't really apply to that many people. Non-binary is okay. So if you're going to have three options, if you're going to have male, female, non-binary, that's okay, but you have to be aware that not all non-binary people consider themselves to be non-binary. So kind of, especially people who are agender, perhaps wouldn't want to fill out non-binary, they'd want to put agender or not applicable or whatever. So finally, like 18 minutes in, like how do you ask about gender? This is my favorite gender form in the actual world. It's not 100% amazing, but it's my favorite. This is from Scratch. So if you've never heard of Scratch, Scratch is amazing. It's a visual learning tool to teach children how to code. So it's like little puzzles that you basically drag and drop bits of code and stuff, so you kind of do everything visually rather than typing. It's amazing. I like this for two reasons. Number one, if you hover over the little help symbol, it will tell you exactly why it's asking you for your gender and what they're going to do with that information, and for date of birth as well, because these are children, so you have to be really careful about how you kind of handle their data. So it tells you, you kind of go, why do you care? And it will tell you. It also, you still have male and female, but it also has the text field. So as a user, I can go into this and go, okay, cool, I can write by gender in here, I can write non-binary in here, I can write please go away in here if I want to. But as a developer, you can pass it out really quickly. You can kind of go, okay, cool, I've got like 20% men, 30% women, and 50%, I couldn't count for a minute, 50%, you know, who are in this kind of text box. The one thing obviously I don't like about this is this doesn't really have a label, and even though I think visually I really like this form, you need to obviously be aware that you need to kind of have ARIA labels and stuff for accessibility. I think phrases like please specify are fine. Some websites use custom, which I'm not quite sure on yet. But kind of just saying like male, female, or just tell us if you can't fill this in. Okay, cool. I realise this is a really difficult, not a really difficult topic, this is a really hard topic to squeeze into 20 minutes. If you want to know more information, there's these 3 really cool websites I really like, especially non-binary stats. So now that Twitter polling's a thing, there's a person and they they basically survey the non-binary and trans community like every year and get kind of attitudes and stuff. But also they're just doing like loads of random little polls, which are really interesting. If you want to learn about what the community want you to say and what they want you to do, like this is a really good place to start. There's organisations like notbinary.co.uk, Beyond the Binary, kind of starting to do a load of really cool work in this area, all about trans. Obviously, I'm going to be in the discussion track and you can talk to me. If you don't feel comfortable talking to me in the discussion track, that's fine. You can tweet me, and I promise not to do that kind of horrible subtweeting thing at you. You can email me, obviously asking about gender at googlemail.com. You can go to my website, not to ask me a question, but just to read all my cool blog posts. But I do have a post on there about kind of my personal experience as being a non-binary person in the tech industry, if that's something you're interested in. And like I said, I am looking for kind of UX producery, project managery work. So if you're a cool company in the Yorkshire area and you think I'm amazing, then please give me money in exchange for my time. Thank you very much.